Anti-knight strategy. This is anti-knight strategy here. We know that an advanced knight is a killer. If you can put your knight on a square where it cannot be kicked out, that knight is going to cause a pain for your opponent for a long time. Black here has a position that maybe is slightly undesirable. He does have control of the open file, so I'm going to give you that. I'm going to give you that this bishop is a pretty good bishop, threatening our knight and maybe eventually our f2 pawn. But the rest of his pieces, they don't strike too much excitement into your heart if you're a black fan. So like the bishop on d7 is not doing anything. It's threatening h3, but that's completely useless. The knight on h5, it could go to f4, but it can't. It could go to g3, but it can't. So it's not doing anything. The queen, that's almost as bad as the queen in the last example. Can't really go anywhere. She's a potted plant in the corner next to her king. She's a great defender, but does she really need to be defended? The f4 square looking weak. Yes, it could become weak, but right now that g3 pawn is very safely defended. So if you can somehow manage to like push your f pawn, this can also become really good for black. Like push your f pawn here, and then if white was to take, which I would not recommend, then you'd actually bring that knight into a beautiful square. This would be a plan for black, but the problem is it's a little bit too slow, and he might actually try it later on. But I doubt that once this pawn rushes to f4, that this pawn will be leaving g3. So, you know, you can imagine pawn to f4, the knight moves, pawn captures, this pawn will recapture, and f4 will stay under white's control. Now, the knight on, excuse me, where did I leave off? So yeah, the knight on h5 is no good. The queen on d8, f8 is no good. But then there's also this piece, and this is the knight on b7. The knight on b7 is really, really bad, like awful bad. It's not doing anything. I mean, it could go to d8, right? But it can also maybe potentially go to a5 and c5. And potential in chess is everything. If you have the potential to win a game, then there's hope. If you have the potential to create annoying threats to your opponent later on, then your opponent is already annoyed at your threats, because literally threats are potential, right? So the potential in chess is sometimes the most powerful force in the game, and most players are always thinking ahead. They're thinking, how do I prevent this? How do I prevent this? How do I threaten to do this? I need this potential to happen, and this potential for the knight, I think, is something I would be afraid of as white. I don't want to allow this knight in. At the very least, I don't really want to lose my bishop for this forsaken knight on b7. So what can I do to ensure the knight doesn't go to a5 or c5? How do we block those squares? And we only have one move, because if we move the knight, or if we move something to defend a5, like for instance we go queen to e1, which is a backhanded way to prevent knight a5, that doesn't prevent knight c5. If we try to prevent knight c5 with, well, there's only one way to prevent knight to c5, and so that's going to be with the correct move. And Penguillian, you got it right. Pawn to b4. This is a move that is just beautiful. It is what we would call, let's just call it hope ending. Some people would call it like a gravestone, because now the pawn is completely cutting off black's entire queenside chances. The bishop is no longer able to maybe exchange itself off for this bishop on d2. This knight is never able to go to c5. This pawn is never able to break open white's queenside and try to maybe get an advantage in space over there. This move completely kills the queenside play. Now, is the game over? Of course not. Let me remind you that this is just an imbalance. We have an advantage in knights now, because his knight is really, really bad on b7, and his knight, you've heard the expression, knight on the wall will fall, or knight on the rim is dim, or grim, or trim, or I'm not sure what else I've heard. But it's not a good piece. So our knights are actually superior in this case.